I recently asked myself, can I go up the Alp du Zwift in under 50 minutes? So let me break it down for you. I joined Zwift late in last year and I went up the Alp du Zwift for the first time in December and it took me 1 hour 19 minutes. So what makes me think I can knock almost half an hour off my original Alp du Zwift time? Here are the numbers for you. Like I said, first time up it, 1 hour 19 minutes and I think around 20 seconds. Recently though, I have improved and my numbers are this. I did an FTP ramp test, that came out at 3:11. Cheeky little video up here on that. I then decided to see how long I could hold 311 watts for. Turns out I could only do it for 16.5 minutes. Video up there. I then did a Zwift FTP test. I think that one came out at 269 for an FTP. Again, check it out. And then lastly, 2 weeks ago, I rode Alp du Zwift during the tour of Watopia and I was doing a big gear session. So just grinding out the watts, keeping my cadence nice and low. This time I actually held 285 watts for 52 minutes and 25 seconds to get from bottom to the top to do Alp du Zwift. So if you take all those numbers and kind of look at them reasonably, I have half a chance of going under 50 minutes. Also, there is a website called Alp du Zwift Calculator where you can put in some details and it will give you a rough idea or a very close idea of what you are able to do from bottom to top. So here we go. I put in my weight, which at the time was 77.6 kg. I put up my rough wattage that I was looking to hold, which would be 300 watts, which would be about 3.9 watts per kg for the whole climb. And it came out and said that if I did that, I'd roughly get 50 minutes. So I was gonna have to hold over 300 watts for close to 50 minutes to get up the Alp in under 50. Can I do it? We will have a look and find out. I'll see you guys on the bike.
Right guys, quite simply, if I was going to have half a chance of doing this in under 50 minutes, I was going to have to kind of give it a measured but quite intense effort. So you can see off the line that one of my tactics was to get out of the saddle and kind of change my pedal stroke up a little bit. So I try and spend a little bit of time on each of the S-bends, just getting out the saddle and working a little bit harder. My first mistake was the fact that I thought the ghost or my little kind of chase ghost on the mini map, which is that small white triangle, was actually my previous time, when in actual fact I have no idea who that was or what time that was actually. So I thought I was kind of well ahead of my time the whole time. Here in the middle of the screen though, we have a Strava representation of my 2:52 time, or sorry, we have a Strava representation of my time that I'm doing now compared to my 52 minutes and 5 seconds time. So you can see as I gradually go through the ride and I'm getting further up Alp du Zwift, I am getting further ahead of my original time of 52:25. So then you can kind of, don't look too far ahead because there are a few blips along the way. But this is a really cool little graphic that just shows you how much this climb is moving ahead and kind of just nudging its way above the time that I'd set previously. And obviously the aim was to knock 2 minutes 25 off that time, which in the start of the climb I was doing quite well. And the things that I like to point out is that my heart rate is quite consistent, 157. It had been a heavy week, which does play a bit of a role on how my heart reacts. I obviously talk about this a whole ton, but if I train really hard, then sometimes I struggle to get my heart rate very high. So sometimes I have to take my heart rate readings with a bit of prior knowledge to what I've been doing into consideration. Is my heart rate a little bit lower because I'm fatigued? I think I'd probably say that might be a bit of the case on this one. But as you can see, that I'm trying to give myself half a chance, and you can see that there are these times when I'm jumping out the saddle to try and put the watts down, to try and change the dynamic of my pedal stroke, to kind of work a little bit differently, kind of change the cadence of my pedal stroke, and then just give me that little half a chance. And obviously, if you're ever going to set this, or if you're ever going to beat your own record up Alp du Zwift, then you've got to have a little bit of tactics when it comes to it. And mine was to kind of change my different strokes, try and go from a bit of time in the saddle, get out the saddle, change it up a little bit, kind of give myself a little bit of a rest in one way or another. But also my main focus was to try and kind of keep my watts over that magical 310 mark, which is what I've got to maintain to get under 50 minutes. Okay, so there was the things that I struggled with was the corners. So every time I come to a corner, the gradient would flatten out a little bit. It would change the difficulty of the intensity or the strength or the resistance on my turbo trainer, and that actually made it a little bit harder for me, because then you have to switch through a few gears to kind of keep your difficulty or the strength and just the force that you're putting through the trainer. And you can see that on most corners, as you come around the corners, and if it flattens out a little bit to these kind of 4%, that's when I would struggle. My watts would drop down a little bit, but all in all, it wasn't too much to worry about. But I will also add that once we got to the 20-minute mark, I was starting to suffer. I've been reasonably consistent. If you look at my watts down at the bottom of the screen, my power zones, and I think they are still based off my 305 FTP that I have inputted back into Zwift. So things are going reasonably well, and I am making my way ahead of my previous time of 52:25. However, once we get to this 25-minute mark, you can see that I start struggling. And in actual fact, it's at this point where I am not increasing my time relative to my previous time. So let's say I am a minute and a half ahead of my previous record, and we're halfway up. So by all accounts, I'm pretty much on target for achieving my goal of going under 50 minutes. I need to get 2 minutes 25 faster than my previous time. And if I'm a minute and a half at halfway, that's kind of pretty good going so far. But this is kind of one of the first points when the wheels come off a little bit before they get completely blown off a little bit later. And you can see on the graph, on the Strava graph, that in actual fact, not only am I not improving my time or making time up on my 52-minute time, I then start to lose a little bit of time. So now I'm just turning slower, and I was really struggling. And the one of the things that I'm going to put this down to is my fueling. So for those of you that don't really kind of understand fueling, you might think, well, it's only 20 minutes. You're only 20 minutes into an effort. Like, why do you need to fuel? You should be able to go kind of 35, 40 minutes in an effort without having to fuel. And I agree with you in some cases. But what you have to remember is my training load is quite high, and I have a busy week. And you get something called the PTE, like post-training effect, which is effectively how much calories your body is consuming after you do a training session relative to the intensity. So if you train harder, you do big intense sessions, your body obviously needs to recover. It needs to repair the muscles. You need to repair a lot of things. You need to also refuel your muscles and your liver with glycogen, so just to store more so that you can go out and do more exercise. And this is what I'd struggle with, having had a few really quite intense days. And also, I did actually do a Zwift race in the morning of this attempt, but you can literally see my watts come right off as I really struggle. And it's at this point that I have to grab a gel and just dive in and be like, right, back in on the gel. And this completely kind of, well, not completely, but massively rejuvenates me and provides the sugar that I need to get back going. So my fueling strategy on this was actually, I don't want to say terrible, because what I had some juice, I had 2 gels, and the gels were just out in front of me. I probably should have factored in for like at least having a third there just in case I needed it, because in this case I obviously really did. And on that Strava chart you can really see the effect of kind of struggling, and then my time is not increasing against my last time. Then I take my gel and suddenly things completely change. So that kind of rejuvenates me a little bit. So we get into the 40 minutes marks. Obviously I've cut my way up the Alp because you don't need to see the entire thing. But if you look on the left, you can see that my averages per turn are just dropping slightly. And I kind of feel like, even though it's touch and go at this point, whether I can make it or reasonably touch and go, I'd have to really kind of kick on. But my wattage I can see is dropping below that 300 mark. But, in all honesty, in the back of my head, I did have my average for the first time I did it up the Alp when I held 52 minutes 25, which was, what was that, 285 watt average. I was like, well, okay, well, if I can hold it above 285, then at least I'm not losing time on my previous effort. So that was my goal, just to try and get back going and try and hold anything over 285 from this point onwards. But lo and behold, we are getting closer and closer, and we're at turn 3, and we're coming up to turn 2, and this is where the wheels like completely kind of come off the wagon, and you have one of those complete meltdowns. I just feel like I'm completely out of sugar. I also started kind of a little bit of cramp, but like breathing cramp. So like I just was struggling to breathe a little bit. And so I am trying to put like everything into this little section here, but it's just not enough. And you can kind of see the wheels completely come off here. I have to take a little standing rest. I just trying to breathe. My heart rate isn't that high. I try not to rest for too long because I'll be honest with you, at this moment I did actually think about quitting completely and not making it to the top. But then it's one of those things where you're like, well, you've come this far. So even if it takes you 60 minutes, 65 minutes, 70 minutes, there's no shame in that whatsoever. So just carry on, get to the top. Just started moving my legs again. I was still struggling a little bit to breathe, even though my heart rate's not very high. But we got moving again, and that was the key thing. And then here we go, guys. You can see in this little section that once I started moving again, there is that section just there on the Strava graph where I lose all that time. I think it ends up being about 35 seconds to my previous time. So all the headway that I had made, I had kind of I'd lost almost half of it just to that little stop where I was just really struggling. And it does go to show that if you do a measured, controlled effort and you're smooth with it, you're probably better off than doing it the way I have. And if you look at my Strava graph at the middle, you can kind of see that obviously I am making time up, then I lose a bit of time, then I start making time up again, and then I lose a bit of time again, and I end up back where I started effectively. But I still kind of at this point thought I had half a chance to kind of get up the Alp. And even though we just clicked through the 50 minutes, and I realized that in actual fact, making it in the 50-minute mark, I kind of knew towards the last few turns that I definitely wasn't going to make it. But still, absolutely no shame in just kind of carrying on and making it to the line. If you look at my power chart at the bottom, you kind of see that in actual fact, it was because I just really didn't measure out my result, and perhaps I put too much effort in, or obviously I put a little bit too much effort in at the bottom. Perhaps my heart rate and my fatigue definitely played a little bit of a role, but I don't want to throw too much emphasis on that. But still, I still have the chance to beat my previous time of 52 minutes 25, so I was always going to carry on and try and do that little kick towards the line that ends up being a very little kick. And then obviously at this stage we're pretty much locked on to beat the 52 minutes, and then it's just a case of what do I think I'm going to get. And then a few seconds later, 51 minutes, I think it's 51 minutes 11 seconds for my effort up the Alp, and I averaged 292 watts, which is a good little increase. Guys, I'll see you in a second.
So a super quick debrief from doing the Alp du Zwift. That took me 51 minutes and 12 seconds. I averaged 292 watts for the whole climb. I actually think that if I was a little bit more rested, or I give myself a couple of days off before doing it, I've got a way better chance. I probably, well, I can't really say it, but I'd like to think I can just nudge under that 50-minute mark, and it's definitely something I am going to give another go. Lastly, on my Zwift Power, after this ride, two things. I weighed myself the next day and realized that I've actually lost a kg from the last time I input my weight into Zwift. So I'm now 76.4 kilograms. Not only that, but my registered FTP on Zwift Power went from 278 watts up to 288 watts as an FTP. That is what Zwift thinks my FTP is. So that's a nice little benefit from doing a full gas effort up the Alps. But there you go. I think that kind of gives us more of an idea of what my kind of 1 hour power is, especially when it comes to climbing. Guys, I will see you at a race soon.